I had no intention to write for young audiences in particular. I started writing as a playwright when I was a student. I was a theatre maker when I was a student, and I started writing because people asked me to. So what I mean by that is I had made plays that I'd directed, I'd been involved in writing, I'd been acting in them, whatever, but there came a point when on the Fringe I had a play that I had written, and that was attracted attention, so people said, okay, we'll commission you to write a play. So really I ended up being a writer, sort of, not by default exactly, but that was what people were interested in, so I did that. Tony Graham, who was then in charge of TAG, which is a company for young people in Glasgow, who said, would I write a piece, and they wanted a piece, and they wanted a piece for young people, and it was to do with war, and at that point the war in Yugoslavia was going on. And it was a small commission, it was a few £100s, it wasn't very much, and it was like a chance, my first chance to get in at the Travers. And I don't know who used the phrase, but whether it was from me or from them, but they talked about Brecht, and they talked about Brecht's short plays which were called Lehrstücke, which means teaching plays. And I think the idea was, either they asked me or I said I would write a short play about this war. So the play I wrote was a play called Petra's Explanation. And that was picked up by Tony Graham at TAG. Subsequently he went to the Unicorn, so he's continued having a career in theatre for young people. But he said, could TAG do it and tour it? And he wanted it specifically for audiences of sort of audiences in school from sort of 7 to 12. So I had to change it a little bit. I had no experience of audiences of that age. But I did change it, and then we toured it, and the way that Tony did that, we went into schools and literally the kids sit around the side, you know, in the school gym hall, and we just did the show. And I really immediately was struck by the fact that these kids had no time for pretension, or they can't hide their boredom. If they're bored, they're bored. They just can't hide it. If they're gripped, they're gripped. They can't hide it. So I suddenly had this visceral thing that they're the best audience. They're the best discipline for a writer because they smash your pretension.
The Petra was for 7 to 12s. I mean, was it a big transition, either from writing for adults or from writing for children, to sort of start writing for teenagers?
Your question was really about what was the jump from young people. Well, in a sense, the jump was less from the people I'd written for in the 90s when I was sort of learning, but from my own children. And it was very scary because I didn't know about teenagers. I thought, well, the only hope I've got is if I make it the most just brilliantly exciting story I can possibly throw at them. So I thought, well, what do those stories have? They have car chases, they have guns, they have murder, you know.
Romance.
Romance, yeah. And I thought, well, and it's for teenagers, so the protagonists should be teenagers, and I kind of didn't know much more than that, and I just kind of launched into it, and not in a dissimilar style to the way I talk to my own children, but this time I was imagining that they were teenagers. And so the relationship with TAG is a relationship with a concept rather than with any individual, although it comes to being a relationship with Guy Hollands. And the concept is just, at that time, they were the company in Scotland who were doing work for young people and also commissioning writers. And so they were the obvious people to go to. But then by the time Guy came along, Guy had this very particular vision of what he wanted to do, and a very particular theatrical vision. And that theatrical vision was no props, no set, just the actors, just storytelling. And that vision hit me at just the moment that that's what I was interested in. It was his rigour that forced me to be imaginative in the writing. I loved that process so much, I thought, well, let's do another. So then we talked about that for a long time. We talked about Monster in the Hall. And the brief with Monster in the Hall was exactly the same, except we thought, well, what can we add? And we thought, let's have music. So we had this feeling that it would have music and song in it. And also with Monster in the Hall, there was this very specific thing that came about because I was interested in the issue of young carers. So these things combined, Guy and me thought that was interesting. And then I met a group called Five Young Carers, which is a group of children in this situation. But the last thing was I said to them, what would be the worst thing I could do if you were in the audience and you saw this? What would be what would make you really cringe and think it was awful? And they said, oh God, please don't make it sad. And I thought, right, okay, so that's my instructions. So what I had then was, it has to be not sad, it has to deliver the information, it has to have songs, I can have no props at all. And then I thought, well, okay, what would be I like thinking in opposites, so I thought, what would be the form that it would be most difficult to do all these things in? And I thought the form would be farce, because farce is all about closing and opening doors and cupboards and people being hidden in cupboards. And I thought, I can have no doors, I can have no cupboards, I can't. And anyway, whoever heard of a farce about, you know, young carers in Fife or something? And then anyway, and it's a musical, so the whole thing just seemed like that's the challenge. You need to put it's like a boil. You need to put so much pressure on yourself.
Yeah.
And so from so many different angles that there's only one way out.
Yeah.
And then you've got to play.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, it'll be all squidgy. If I had my way, I would tour every one of my plays to a school first. I would do it as a school's tour first. I just think it's great. Teenagers are almost embarrassed sometimes to show that they're too into something. So to get teenagers into it, you really need to be good.
Yeah.
You know, you really need the story really needs to be zimming along.
Yeah.
And I also think teenagers have a hugely, fantastically attuned bullshit monitor. They can really smell bullshit. Mm-hmm. And so the combination of that means that to get through that filter, if you can get through that filter, your play, and this has been proved to me with Yellow Moon and Monster in the Hall, have toured to adult audiences, and both of those plays have been done all over the world now in different productions. Not necessarily aimed at teenagers, but the only reason is because they've gone through that filter. Which leads me to this point, which is that the big mistake of making plays for teenagers that people make is thinking that there is such a thing as for teenagers. It just needs to be really good, and writing for teenagers helps it to be that. Dramaturgy, the shaping of plays, shaping of story is all about limitation. Limitation is really, really important. So you say 5 actors and it's got to fit in a van, well that's brilliant. You've already given me something to work with. And of course what I will try and do, my approach is always to start with, well, what would be the very worst idea to try and do with 5 actors that has to fit in a van for teenagers, if that's our thing, or for 3-year-olds, or whatever your brief is. I would then say, okay, you've given me the limits, right? Now I'm going to think, what is the thing that would be absolutely the hardest, the most ridiculously stupid thing to try to achieve in that context? And that's what I'll try and do. So what I do is I get my lovely coloured index cards.
Do you want to lift them up a bit? That's it.
And they all have things written on them, as you can see. This is a project that I'm doing, a film project. But what I do is, when I'm developing a project, there comes a point where I just start to write down like a thought, really, a little bit of dialogue maybe, or a scene notion, or like if I was doing Stepney Local Council How to Avoid Legionnaire's Disease play, I would find out that Legionnaire's disease lives in drips in pipes, right? And I might just write, we literally go inside a dripping pipe. That's an interesting thing, I don't know what it is, but I'll write that down. All through developing the project, I just do that until, like this one, I've got like this massive pipe. And then, when it comes to writing time, what I do is I just shuffle the cards and I say, what's at the top? We literally go inside pipes. So I go, right, okay, and I have to type something in response to that, anything. I could write just, we literally go inside pipes, or I could go, we go inside a pipe. Like a thing, you know, it could be like a film, stage direction, or I could write a monologue of something. It doesn't really matter, I just do something, anything, until I run out of inspiration. I go to the next card. It's the plumber's quote, and I just write that, and maybe someone replies to it, or maybe it becomes a scene, maybe it doesn't, maybe it's just that. I go through. And I just do that, and there's no purpose to it. I don't know if these things will end up in the play or not in the play. I don't know anything about it. I just do it. And then I go to my story that I've been telling to teenagers or whatever, and I start arranging the cards sort of on the ground and seeing where they seem to fit in the story, if there is a story. I just kind of go, oh, right, okay, so going into the pipe, that feels like a beginning, so let's put that there. And Plummer talking about logic, that seems to be, he would be fixing, so it comes there. And this bit where I've just wanted to write about rain, that goes here, and this history of Legionnaires, that goes there. So I just do that. And then the last phase is I go back to all the writing that I did in response to the cards, and I literally, all I do is I just put it in the order that the cards now tell me. And that means what I've got is a pile of writing, usually about 30 odd pages, 40 pages, 50. And it's a play. It's not a play, you're going to have to work on it, but it is actually a play. And what you find is that you never had that moment of sitting looking at a blank sheet of paper. Because you were never writing a play. But suddenly there's a play, and now what you're doing is rewriting a play and shaping it and making it, and you discover all kinds of tangents that you wouldn't have gone down. Because my tip is, you can play that game, do that as an exercise, but my main tip is never write a play. Don't write a play. That'll kill you. The moment you sit down and go, scene 1, you'll die. Whatever you do, write, even if you don't do the cards, write as your first stage direction, scene 12. Just so that you don't have that feeling that you're doing at the beginning.